So my poetic journey, where did it begin? It began in the second year of college. I went to JC here in Borstal Heath. And I remember in the second year, the college had a poetry competition going, set by the PE department. It was a partnership between the PE department and the English department. I entered it because I thought I could write better than Christina Rossetti at the time. I remember studying Christina Rossetti during A-level English, and instead of doing my coursework during class, I was too busy writing response poems to Rossetti. And then I submitted one of those poems to the college poetry competition, won first prize. The prize was me and 5 of my friends got to go to like an activity day center. So we got to do rock climbing, canoeing. Some of the PE department was in charge of the prize bit, which was really odd. I feel like there should be more poetry prizes. It should be designed by activity and like leisure centres, I think, because that was the best. My friends were happy, I was happy. I took a gap year, and during my gap year, there used to be a poetry group run from the old library called Poet's Place. That was a group run by Apples and Snakes from the old library. I went along once, just with, a bit of writing. I hadn't been out the house for a long time, had struggled with my mental health, and this was one of the first times I was coming back out into the world. At the end of this writing session, they made a list of poetry events you could go to where you could read out your work. And one of the nights was Word Up. I went along to Word Up, met Amira Saleh. The rest was history. From there, I think I just realized that I can't do anything else with my life. This is it. This is the thing that I think I'm semi-good at, that I should probably keep trying at for the rest of my life now. As it stands, I've done 12 years of being a freelance creative, performing poetry, writing poetry, doing commissions, writing for theatre. I think it was maybe whilst at University of Derby that I got into theatre writing. I started to write longer poetic monologues that I realised, these might work better on a stage. At that point, I became a graduate associate artist with Derby Theatre, and I had the opportunity to start testing out some of my work on theatre stages, which was quite an interesting experience. A few years after that, began doing work with Stuns Cafe and a few other organisations that allowed me to get into the world of theatre directing, which was also amazing. I'm performing in theatre shows myself, and a lot of stuff happened in between. A lot of performances, a lot of commissions. I've done all kinds of work with different organisations. And then I started workshopping. So I started off as a shadow workshop facilitator with maybe Berkovich, was probably one of my earliest shadow experiences. And then I think I shadowed Spaz, shadowed Amira Saleh, shadowed Casey, shadowed a few other people before I gained the confidence to run my own workshops. So that makes the bulk of my money right now, to be honest. But I love it. I love working with kids especially. I think my favourite project to this day has been this writing for wellbeing club that I ran with the National Literacy Trust in a few different secondary schools across Birmingham. That was really fulfilling, working with young people and thinking about poetry as a wellbeing tool, as opposed to thinking about academic poetry writing where you're talking about metaphors and similes and enjambment and all of these kind of literary terms. It was quite refreshing for me to go into schools and engage with poetry in that kind of a more relaxed way again, which is why I started writing all those years ago when I did. It was more from a place of for my own well-being. Rather than this is my craft and I'm going to make this, my craft. It was really beautiful experience to go into schools and learn to slow down myself and learn to validate my own responses to poems, because I was having to do that for the kids as well, like ask them, how they felt about the poem and what it reminded them of from their own lives, and reminding them that no answer is a wrong answer. And that all that mattered was that they were giving me their personal unfiltered response and validating everyone in that room, validating everyone's response, even if it was, "Miss, I felt nothing." I'd be like, "Yeah, that's valid, mate. That's absolute perfect." So coming back to present moment, I'm studying. 3 years ago, I applied for the MA writing poetry course with Poetry School London and Newcastle University. I got my place in the course, but I didn't get my scholarship in the first year. So I thought, you know what, let's wait another year because I ain't got money for a degree right now. And luckily in the second year, they offered me a scholarship. I'm coming towards the end of my degree right now. And in this past year, obviously I was quite aware that I'm coming to the end of this like intense focus 2 years that I've had writing poetry, not thinking about performance too much at all. And I was very aware that, I think it's time to get back into performance again. In the past 3 months, I did a 1-week intensive puppetry course. And I've picked up bansuri, which is Indian flute, because these are things I really want to incorporate into my spoken word at some point. I want to be a puppeteer, flute player, poet. I think the themes have stayed relatively similar throughout my writing journey. Current themes that I'm very passionate on writing about are still belonging, identity, faith, local politics. There's always plenty to write about in politics, and the human condition, mental health. I think, anything that impacts my life directly in some way or another. I try to write poetry that encompasses the various complexities of what it is to be human, but also quite often, I don't know what a poem's going to be until I've finished it, and then it shows itself. I'm like, wow, you've really revealed something about my subconscious there, poem. Don't know if I want to share that with the world. So I'm there right now. My focus for the past 2 years has really been around translation. I'm really passionate about learning, reteaching myself my mother tongue. And when I first started the MA writing poetry course, I happened to find a Pahari Patwari writing group at the same time, run by a wonderful Bradford poet called Nabila Ahmed, whose books are behind here. And Nabila Ahmed started this group. It was like a kind of exchange between people who are fluent in my mother tongue, Pahari Patwari, and people who just want to, sharpen up their language skills in that area. That was a very challenging experience, actually. I thought I was more fluent. Turns out I've lost a lot of the fluency of my mother tongue. Whilst on this in this writing group as well, I learned that there's literally, I could name them on one hand, the number of researchers who are doing research into Pahari Patwari as a language rather than a dialect. There is Farah, whose surname I can't remember, but she's a linguist, and Nabila Ahmed, Brother Awais. I think, they're the main people I can think of who are doing the research that's required to take something that's a dialect and to have it seen classified as a language. I didn't realise what a tricky thing that is to do, but it really involves academia, which is quite interesting. So I've been trying to do a lot of writing my poems in English, translating them into my mother tongue. Anything I'm writing in my mother tongue, translating it back into English. And I've learned that translation it's not as simple as going, word by word. You've really got to capture the essence of each poem, and you've got to be very fluent, have a really fluent and nuanced understanding of both languages to be able to do the translation as well. So that's been my hardest task for the past 2 years, but the most fruitful, and the one that's filling up my heart the most as well. And it was it was a way for me to decolonize my writing practice. It felt like the most obvious way of going about decolonizing my writing practice. And it wasn't until my MA writing poetry course that I really, really began to sit with what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, rather than kind of passively saying, well, I just came out with that poem and I don't know how I came out with it. It just came out. But actually really thinking about, but how did it come out and how did I write it and where did it come from and why did I decide to use that word and not that word and why did I decide to finish the line here and not there? Really starting to reflect on these things. And one of my biggest reflections was, who's my audience? Who am I writing for? Who do I feel perceived by? Who am I trying to impress? I'm trying to come back to a more authentic part of myself, in terms of, who am I as a writer? When money is not involved, when no one's watching me, what is it that I really feel like needs speaking about? And what is my way of speaking about that particular subject? And my way happens to be writing more and more using my mother tongue. There's a handful of poets that I keep in my pocket, like as my go-to poets. And they'll be like, I think throughout my lifetime, I'll keep going back to them as well. There's Hanif Abdurraqib, who I just absolutely adore, US-based poet. An essayist and novelist, but he writes in such a beautiful, gorgeous, poetic way. Even the non-fiction is so lyrical, and I love that. Claudia Rankin, Farid Uddin, who was one of the teachers of Rumi, and he's got a very famous poem called Conference of the Birds. And it's an allegorical poem, so there's a lot of archetypes in there. Each bird represents a different archetype. And I love that poem so much. I think I'll be reading it for the rest of my life. Fatima Asghar, Mahmoud Darwish, who I really wanted to read today as well. Trying to think who else do I carry around with me. June Jordan. I really love me some June Jordan. Yeah, I think they'd if I was stuck on like a desert island or whatever, and I had to take a handful of poets, these are the poets I would take. Yeah, there we go. I think I mentioned earlier about how sometimes a poem doesn't reveal itself until like the third, fourth, fifth draft. When I say it reveals itself, like literally, I don't know what the poem is saying until that fourth or fifth draft. And then when I do realize what it's saying, I want to bury a hole and get into it, because it's revealing something about myself, or it's revealing something about the world that I feel uncomfortable to look at. But lo and behold, we're on fourth edit now and I can't not see it at this point. And I think that's a very special thing about poetry, is that it evokes emotions and reveals things from our subconscious without totally bowling us away, because it's so full of metaphor and simile, so it's digestible as well, those truths that show themselves, not just about the writer but about ourselves, because as the reader, it'll be revealing truths about yourself depending on how you've chosen to interpret that poem. And I think that's magical. That's absolute magic, to create a body of work that then reveals something to someone else about their own subconscious, as well as it revealing something about something from my subconscious that's making me go, oh my God, that's hard to look at. I think that's really magical in terms of helping me to know myself, understand the world around me more intimately, and in doing so having like a deeper empathy for all angles of my own humanity and other people's humanity as well. I really do feel like I'm a bit of an alchemist. I feel like poets are alchemists in a way that fiction writers, or I don't know, people who write script or like people who engage in other artistic mediums. Like, there's a level of magic trickery involved in writing poetry. And by writing poetry as well, I'm talking about like not just bash-boshing out that first draft, it's all the work that happens after you've splattered those first few words down, and then the months and months you'll take really condensing it down to get the best words in the best order. I love the Birmingham poetry community so much. I don't think I'd have friends. I don't think I'd have many friends if it was not for the Birmingham poetry scene, and I feel so lucky for that. Like, what other, field of work can you say, like, oh, these guys are also my best mates, pretty much? I feel so lucky for that. Like, I think most of my chosen family are made up of people I met through the Birmingham poetry scene, and that's precious. These guys are my support network, they're my peers, they're my homies, we eat together, it's all, we are family. I felt a lot of care and love when I first came into the community all those years ago. Like I said, I started off at that writing group at the library, the way Nikki B, she brought me in because I was sat on the edge. I was too shy to talk to anybody. Now you can't shut me up. I remember I was sat on the edge, like really away from everybody, and Nikki B was like, oh, do you want to come in and join the group? I was like, oh God, no. But I'm glad she encouraged me to. And I think since then I've tried to do that. I've tried to give back as much as I've received. There were so many people who championed me right from the beginning. Amira Saleh really comes to the forefront of my mind as one of my biggest champions. And I always remember that when I come across new emerging poets or poets who I've not heard of yet, or poets who are performing for the first time. I remember Amira Saleh. I'm like, yeah, I want to be there for people the way that Amira was there for me, and I want to share these opportunities. I feel like Birmingham is we're very good at supporting each other and finding creative ways to make things happen. Because I think our council's not always so reliable. Government fundings are not so reliable. We're not central London, so we gotta make do with what we've got. And so I feel like Brummy poets are very inventive and creative about how we make things happen. I remember Sean Coletti's living room sessions, how creative an idea that was. I will always want to do as much as I can to support this scene and to support the growth of this scene. I am so grateful to have had the support that I did, especially in those early years, in the first 5 years, specifically from Bogdan, Spoz, Dreadlock Alien, all these people telling me to keep going, Amira Saleh telling me to keep going, keep out this. Even though I think I was me and Amira were the only hijabis around at the time on the scene, and a lot of the poetry nights were late night. My dad would pick me up, drop me off. But I think things are becoming more and more accessible. I've noticed that in the scene over the years. More accessibility, more nights popping up. Some nights close down, another one pops up. So there's always this running wheel of poetry events occurring in Birmingham. But even unofficial events, like Kamil does this. Kamil, who I met during the poetry scene, one of my closest mates now, who I have a collective with called Gully Collective. Kamil took the initiative of starting up these Java meets. So every Saturday, pretty much, he'll message a bunch of poets saying, yo, I'm hanging out at Java Lounge in Moseley from this time. Usually it's from 11 a.m. until about 3-4 p.m. And you can come and go as you like. And sometimes even when Kamil's not there, I notice people just gravitate towards it on a Saturday. Writers gravitate there, we discuss ideas. We might do a bit of writing, applying for different grants and projects and commissions. Yeah, I'm really grateful for the amount of sharing and generosity, care, love, consideration that I've found in this community. And I'm grateful for the community. All right, so I'm going to work with Kneecap here, the Irish band. Obviously they're very passionate about reviving the Gaelic language, and I'm passionate about preserving dying languages because my mother tongue is a dying language as well. So I'm about to finish my master's, and next I'd love to take on a PhD, maybe at Dublin Trinity or somewhere like that, and find a way of working with kneecap. But outside of that, Paul, I'd love to continue my translation work. Like I mentioned earlier, I did a 1-week intensive puppetry course. So I'd really love to continue developing that craft. So I don't become one of those jack of all trades, master of none, I want to become a master of puppetry as well, and a master of bansuri as well. So they're the two new artistic mediums I'm trying to incorporate into my work. I'm also doing a printing residency at the moment at the All Print Works with print and matter. So I'm learning different printing techniques because one day I'd love to open up my own poetry press. And I think that's about it. Yeah, preserving dying languages, continuing to write around the themes of faith, subcultures, the underdogs in society, because God knows I love me an underdog. And continuing to help build sustainable frameworks to keep the poetry scene in the Midlands going and going and going.